You people always think you belong up here." The words exploded through the first-class cabin like a stray bullet. Every head turned toward seat 2A, where Dr. Naomi Brooks, her black hair neatly tied, and her grey suit understated, but elegant, looked up not too fast, not too slow, just enough to let silence become a statement. The calm in her eyes unsettled everyone, especially those used to being obeyed. The man who had spoken, Gregory Whitman, in his early 50s, with slicked-back salt-and-pepper hair and an Italian suit pressed to perfection, stood with one hand on the headrest of Naomi's seat, as if reclaiming something that belonged to him. The air thickened the smell of leather seats, expensive cologne, and unmistakable arrogance blending together. Captain Thomas Avery appeared in the aisle, his eyes narrowing. He said nothing, but his silence alone seemed to validate Gregory's assumption that he was right. "Is there a problem, Mr. Whitman?" a soft voice asked. Flight attendant Jenna Collins, 28, young and composed, hurried over after Gregory pressed the call button. "There's been a mistake," Gregory said, in a deep, reasonable tone. "She's sitting in the wrong seat." "This is first class." Jenna pressed her lips together. The sentence sounded polite, yet it carried the weight of generations of prejudice. Naomi didn't react. She set her laptop down and said calmly, "I don't believe there's been any mistake." The words were short and sharp, slicing through the air like a cold blade. Jenna stepped back slightly, but kept the trained smile of someone paid to keep passengers comfortable. "May I see your ticket, Mum?" Naomi opened her phone and held it up. Seat 2, a first class confirmed. Everything was clear. But Jenna didn't stop. "And you're certain this is a first-class ticket?" A pause. The question landed like a slap. Gregory leaned back, lips curling. He didn't need to say another word. The system would speak for him. Naomi smiled. Just a small, thin curve, still and quiet, like the surface of a lake before a storm. Sometimes the app has glitches. "Let me check with the gate," Jenna said quickly, and walked away. No one noticed Naomi's hand tightening slightly on her thigh. She had seen this before too many times, but this time was different. Because she wasn't who they thought she was. Gregory rustled his newspaper, the sound sharp and triumphant. To him she was just one of them, that invisible they men like him often spoke of with a condescending grin. The cabin buzzed with murmurs, yet for Naomi every sound faded into a dull hum. She saw the looks around her, curiosity, doubt, indifference. A woman across the aisle adjusted her purse, avoiding eye contact. A man behind shook his head, as if to say how troublesome. Naomi took a deep breath. No arguing, no explaining, just observing. In that moment, she made a decision. If they wanted verification, she would give them more than that truth proof and consequences. Jenna returned with the purser, Paul Ramirez, 41, tall, composed, with a face so calm, it seemed unnatural. "Ma'am," he began, "we just need to verify a few details in our system." "Verify what exactly?" Naomi asked. Paul smiled politely, the kind of bureaucratic smile that meant nothing. "Just standard procedure." "Standard for whom?" she replied. He didn't answer. Gregory chimed in, his tone smooth as glass. "We all want the flight to go smoothly, don't we? A little verification never hurts." Each word sprinkled salt over an open wound. Naomi looked straight at Paul. "If you want to recheck, then check everyone's ticket in this cabin. I'll wait." Paul looked away. "No need. It's just a small process." Naomi's smile turned faintly cold. "A process meant only for me." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and cutting enough to make the entire cabin still. An older woman wearing pearls behind her interjected, "We all want to reach Charlotte on time. If there's an issue, best to handle it now." It sounded polite, but beneath the civility was judgment. She was the problem. Naomi turned her head slightly. "I'm not causing a delay. I'm just sitting in the seat that belongs to me." Silence. The air seemed ready to shatter. Paul sighed and lowered his voice. "Ma'am, please step out to the jetway so we can resolve this quickly." "No." One word, but it struck like a locked bolt. Gregory lowered his newspaper, smiling with satisfaction. "Shall I call the captain?" Paul hesitated. "I'll call Captain Avery." Naomi nodded. "Good. Call him." As Paul walked away, she placed her phone on the tray table and turned on the camera, the small red light glowing. She said nothing more. From this moment, everything would be recorded. Outside the window, the morning sky over JFK stretched in shades of silver grey, reflecting in her eyes, steady, unflinching, cold as steel. Across the aisle, Gregory muttered, "What a waste of time," and turned another page of his newspaper. Naomi, silent, let a faint smile touch her lips. If he thought she was just another passenger, he was about to learn who truly ruled these skies. The first-class cabin was as silent as a courtroom before a verdict. In seat 2, Dr. Naomi Brooks closed her laptop, folded her hands, and sat so still she could hear the rhythm of her own breathing. Across the aisle, Gregory Whitman flipped his newspaper but didn't read it, each rustle a declaration of confidence that the entire system stood behind him. The soft click of polished shoes broke the stillness. Jenna Collins, the young flight attendant, returned wearing a thin, practiced smile, the kind of smile trained from hundreds of service recovery scripts. Beside her stood a man with black hair, threaded with silver uniform, crisp tablet, tucked neatly under one arm, Paul Ramirez, the purser. Ma'am Jenna began politely, "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. We just need to verify a few more details in the system." Naomi looked up, calm and composed. "What details exactly?" Paul shifted slightly, his voice smooth, even, and wrapped in an invisible wall. "It's standard procedure when there's a seating discrepancy." A discrepancy from whom Naomi asked. "We just want to make sure everything runs smoothly before takeoff," he replied. The answer carried no subject, a sanitized language designed to remove responsibility from every syllable. Naomi opened her phone, showing the bright screen. "Atlas Air flight from JFK to Charlotte, first class, seat 2A confirmed. Booking code, full name, blue check mark, after checking every detail, textbook perfect." Paul glanced at the screen and nodded, but his nod didn't signal resolution. "Thank you, Mum. I'll just cross-check this with the manifest." Why not cross-check his? 2. Naomi tilted her head toward Gregory. A few eyes darted subtly, but Gregory didn't look her way. He folded his newspaper, tapping his fingers on the armrest in quiet triumph. "We're not implying anything," Ma'am Paul said, with his professional smile placed exactly where it needed to be. Sometimes the app glitches or seat upgrades through points don't process properly, and sometimes Naomi interrupted her voice, low and smooth as polished steel. Someone sees a face they don't expect in first class and decides to call it a glitch. The air froze. Jenna blinked quickly. Paul glanced down at his tablet, scrolling a screen that hadn't moved. The woman in pearls behind them leaned forward slightly. "If there's a problem, it's best to fix it now so we can take off." Polite, proper, but the arrow had already found its target. She was the problem. Naomi offered a courteous smile. "I am cooperating. I'm sitting in the seat I paid for." Gregory cleared his throat loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Nobody wants delays. First class has its standards. The word standards landed like a lock, clicking shut, precise, cold, absolute. Paul lowered his tablet. "Ma'am, to make things easier, could you please step out to the jetway for a moment while we—" Number a single, calm syllable closed every escape route. Jenna clasped her hands tightly. "Please don't misunderstand. We're just trying to help." "Help by removing me from the seat I already occupy?" Naomi asked. Jenna fell silent. Paul changed tone, quieter but firmer. "If you cooperate, this will go much faster. I've already shown my ticket, my code, my confirmation," Naomi said, counting on her fingers. "What else must I provide to prove I have the right to exist here?" The cabin turned into a dense, fragile silence, where even the click of a seatbelt echoed. A businessman in row 3 sighed in irritation. A young woman quietly lifted her phone camera, already rolling. Paul drew a long breath, his eyes revealing a strain he tried to hide. "I'll ask Captain Thomas Avery to make the final verification." "Please do," Naomi replied, placing her phone on the tray table and fixing her gaze calmly on the cabin door. In that suspended moment, time seemed to stretch, coating seat 2A in a reflective stillness. Naomi felt her heartbeat steady and slow, not from fear, but from a familiar understanding. No one believes you until you turn yourself into proof. A faint vibration rippled through the aircraft forward, then back, as if warning that what came next would not be a technical inspection, but a test of dignity. Paul nodded politely, and Jenna stepped back half a pace. Naomi looked through the window where JFK's runway stretched like a blade of silver-grey steel. Inside, every pair of eyes still measured her as a variable to be removed so the flight could return to normal. She leaned back, fastened her seatbelt, and rested her hand lightly on her phone. One touch could turn judgment into evidence. When the cockpit door finally opened, Naomi didn't flinch. She exhaled slowly. This was no longer a verification. This was a verdict deciding who belonged here and who did not, and she was ready. The cockpit door swung open, and Captain Thomas Avery stepped out like a bold line, separating calm from chaos. He was just shy of 60, with neatly trimmed silver hair, squared shoulders, and the assured step of a man who had logged thousands of flight hours. He stopped at row 2, his gaze passing over Naomi, not cold, not warm, simply measuring. "Ma'am," his voice was deep and deliberate. "I understand there's been a small misunderstanding about your seat." "There's no misunderstanding," Naomi replied, handing over her phone, showing seat 2A, check-in and confirmation code. Avery looked it over and nodded slightly. "The documentation looks fine, but I'm sure you understand. We have to ensure the experience of all passengers." The phrase "all passengers" landed like a pebble on a still pond, rippling just enough for someone nearby to nod in quiet agreement. In seat 2B, Gregory lifted an eyebrow, wearing the smug expression of someone thinking, "See specifically which experience is being disrupted." Naomi asked, her tone even and precise as a ruler. Avery glanced toward Paul Ramirez. Paul dipped his head slightly, signaling that there had been a complaint. Avery turned back to Naomi. "There's been feedback about a possible upgrade error or an app malfunction." "And does that feedback come with any evidence?" Silence followed for a beat. Gregory seized the moment. "I've flown this route for 15 years, and I've never been delayed over something like this. I think it's reasonable to clarify." Avery nodded toward Gregory, his expression saying, "I understand." In that instant, Naomi saw it. Clearly the procedure had just taken on a human face. She placed a hand on her seatbelt, but didn't unbuckle it. "I've already provided everything. What more do you need?" Avery's tone remained polite, almost gentle. "If you cooperate, we'll resolve this quickly. You could step out to the jetway for just a few minutes." "No," Naomi said firmly. "I am seated in the spot assigned to me. If there's a system issue, fix it here. You don't remove someone from their seat just to make the situation look tidy." Jenna swallowed hard. Paul tightened his grip on the tablet. Gregory gave a quiet, mocking laugh. "You sound defensive." Naomi turned fully toward him. "Defensive is not the same as having dignity." Avery raised a calming hand. "Let's all stay calm. Ma'am, the crew's request is simply to cooperate with the recheck." Naomi held his gaze. "I am cooperating. You're just not listening." The final word struck like a gavel. A few passengers craned their necks. The young woman in row 3 increased her camera's brightness. Avery's voice sharpened by half a tone. "We need to depart on time. Please don't make this more complicated." "What makes things complicated," Naomi said, "is when people choose to trust their feelings over the facts right in front of them." Gregory tapped his fingers on the armrest. "This is first class. Nobody wants drama." "You don't want drama," Naomi said slowly, "but you wrote the first act." A flicker of red rose in Gregory's face. Avery leaned toward Paul and spoke quietly into the intercom. The air shifted. Naomi could feel the subtle electric current under the carpet they were framing the story. "Ma'am," Avery said, finally dropping the last trace of his polite smile, "I'll ask one last time. Please step out to the jetway for a moment while we sort this out. If you refuse, I'll have to consider this non-compliance with crew instructions." A line had been drawn. On one side was cooperation, on the other, defiance. Between them sat a woman with her seatbelt fastened tight enough to hold loose enough to breathe. Naomi inhaled deeply, anchoring herself in the storm's eye. Then she spoke her voice, low and steady, the kind that made people's skin prickle. "No, I will not leave my seat. I've shown my ticket, my code, my confirmation. If my presence in this seat is what you call non-compliance, then the problem isn't me." A space opened between words, and in that space, everyone seemed to hear the same unspoken question. If she were someone else, would they do this? Avery tightened the strap of his cap. "Ma'am, if you continue, I'll have to call security." Naomi tilted her head, slightly calm and unwavering. "Then call someone with more authority than security." Avery frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean." Naomi said, her eyes dark and tempered like forged steel. "You should call your CEO." Gregory burst out laughing. "That's absurd." A few whispers rippled through the cabin like sparks catching dry cotton. Avery didn't laugh. He looked at Naomi a moment longer, searching her eyes for an answer. There was none, only certainty. He gave Paul a small nod. "Call security." Paul pressed the button. Jenna stood frozen. Naomi placed her phone on the tray, tilting the camera slightly toward the aisle. The tiny red light came on. The cabin seemed to cool by a single degree. No one spoke, but everyone understood. From this moment forward, everything would be on record. And that was the instant the story no longer belonged to first class. It was about to belong to the entire sky. The faint static of the intercom faded, leaving behind a silence deep enough to hear the quickened heartbeat of the person beside you. Naomi Brooks sat upright, her hands folded neatly on her lap, eyes fixed at the level of the phone that was still recording. The small red light blinked, steady, patient, unflinching. Ma'am, Paul Ramirez returned, his voice lower now, a full tone softer. "For safety reasons, we need to ask you to step off the aircraft temporarily." For whose safety? Naomi asked. Paul hesitated, then answered by the book. For everyone's. Except I'm not part of everyone. Naomi said, not as a question, but as a fact. From row 3, a man in a grey suit, Ryan Cole, leaned forward. Excuse me, but we all have somewhere to be. If there's a problem, can we just solve it quickly? Yeah, a young woman added. Let's not drag this out. Their voices stitched together, a thin layer of false normalcy across the cabin, desperately trying to hide the tear running straight through seat 2A. Naomi turned her head slowly, letting her gaze pass over each face masks of polite detachment. I'm sitting in the correct seat. I've shown every piece of proof. The only issue here is that someone refuses to believe I belong. The word belong rang out like a piece of metal dropped on glass. Captain Avery took one step closer, blocking part of the aisle. Ma'am, this is the final request. Naomi looked down, unbuckled her seatbelt, then fastened it again. A small motion, but it struck like thunder. No. The cabin exhaled all at once. Gregory folded his arms, smirking like a man tolerating defeat instead of suffering it. You're making everyone late. Naomi met his eyes. You made everyone late the moment you turned a person into a suspicion. Don't play that card, Gregory said, with the kind of laugh everyone recognized too well. Naomi tilted her head slightly, her voice almost a whisper. Do you know which card I'm about to play? The truth? She opened her messaging app, her fingers typing a single precise line. The screen lit up, delivered. No one knew who she had messaged, but the air seemed to change color, as if someone had opened a window and let the storm in. Avery gripped the brim of his cap tighter. I'll call security. You already did, Naomi replied, her eyes still fixed on the phone's recording screen. And when they arrive, every action taken here will be on record. A long silence followed. Then from the back of first class, a woman's clear, steady voice rose. She hasn't done anything wrong. Heads turned. Angela Price, 52, wearing a cream blazer, stood up. I've been watching since the beginning. She's complied with every request. You're forcing her out based on assumption. A current ran through the cabin. Gregory snorted. Of course you'd defend her. Angela raised an eyebrow. What exactly do you mean by that? Say it clearly. Gregory fell silent. Several eyes darted away like doors slamming shut. Avery glanced at his watch. I'm not going to argue. Ma'am, if you refuse to comply, this becomes a security issue. Naomi looked at him, her tone softening into something unsettlingly calm. When a black woman sitting in the seat she paid for is told to leave for the comfort of everyone, the security issue isn't her. It's how you define everyone. The cabin door opened. 2 security officers stepped in, dark uniforms, synchronized steps. The one in front was compact, his badge gleaming R. Martinez. He stopped at row 2, taking in the scene, a composed woman, a recording phone, a tense captain, a few passengers with their cameras raised, and others staring at their shoes. Ma'am Martinez said, voice neutral, I need you to come with us so we can clarify the situation. Naomi reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a small white business card. Its edges rounded her name, embossed in silver, Dr. Naomi Brooks, co-founder and Chief Executive Officer, Atlas Air. Martinez froze. He looked up and met eyes that carried no anger, no plea, only quiet authority. Avery stepped back half a pace like a man realizing he had wandered too close to a cliff. Before you do anything else, Naomi said to Martinez, her tone low, but sharp, call your superior. And she turned to Avery. If you're wise, you'll call Daniel Pierce right now. Gregory burst out laughing. Ridiculous. But no one joined him. The cameras were rolling, the red lights blinking, and the silence inside first class had changed its nature. It no longer protected prejudice. It was waiting for the truth. Naomi leaned back, refastened her seatbelt, and rested her hand lightly on her phone, as if placing her palm over a sworn statement. Through the window the runway gleamed silver, the lights trembling, the sky stretching thin like a curtain ready to drop. "Call," she said softly. It's time someone with real authority spoke. And somewhere on the ground, several phone lines away, a ringtone began to buzz. The pieces started to lock into place. The gears of a vast machine began to turn. The story was no longer about seat touffé. It was about a reckoning with how the world defined dignity. As Martinez lifted his hand to his radio, as Avery stared at the business card, as Gregory leaned forward in disbelief, Naomi closed her eyes and took a long, steady breath. She could hear the faint hum of the air system, the pulse of the blinking red light, the distant vibration of the engines. The storm had formed, and at its center, she remained still. Safety issue. The two words fell from Captain Thomas Avery's mouth like a sentence handed down in court. Naomi Brooks looked at him, her eyes reflecting an unsettling silence, the kind carried by someone who knows she is about to be judged unfairly, yet chooses to remain still, so the injustice can expose itself. She spoke slowly, each word beating like a measured drum. "You're calling this a safety issue." Avery stood tall, his voice calm and procedural. "You've refused to comply with the crew. When a passenger refuses instructions, it becomes a safety concern." The cabin was utterly still. Not from respect, but from anticipation. Everyone was waiting to see what she would do. Naomi drew a slow, steady breath, then spoke, soft as air, cold as a blade. "I'm sitting in my seat. I'm not yelling, I'm not disrupting anyone. I'm simply existing. And you call that dangerous?" The silence that followed was no longer ordinary. It thickened, as if each person could hear themselves inside it, but didn't dare to speak. A man's voice broke the quiet from the back rows. "Come on, let's get this moving. We all have places to be." The speaker, Ryan Cole, mid-30s, grey suit, a watch gleaming on his wrist, spoke sharply like a knife. "If she doesn't leave, the flight will be delayed. We're all being affected." "He's right," a young woman in row 3 chimed in, followed by a few nods. "Just let security handle it." "She's clearly being difficult." Gregory Whitman smiled smugly, leaning back as if he were orchestrating the whole room. He muttered just loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. "She's just putting on a show." Naomi turned her head, her gaze sweeping across every face, the faces of those who had never been doubted in their lives, the ones who always knew they belonged up here. "You're calling me a threat," she said, locking eyes with Avery. "No, I'm only saying, no need to say it." "I understand." Her voice deepened, steady as iron. "I'm being threatened with removal from this cabin because someone doesn't believe I deserve the seat I paid for. And you, instead of standing for principle, chose to stand beside him." Gregory scoffed. "Oh, come on. Don't bring race into this." This time, Naomi turned fully toward him. Her tone was low, but every word cut like glass. "You've sat next to me for 20 minutes. In that time, you questioned my ticket, doubted me, and demanded that I be removed. You never asked my name, what I do, or where I'm headed. To you, I'm not a person, I'm a problem." Gregory clenched his jaw. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to. You already made it clear." No one spoke. The engines outside hummed steadily. But inside the cabin, the only sound was the uneven breathing of those beginning to realize that the normalcy they were defending was its own quiet form of violence. Then another voice rose, gentle but firm. She's right. Every head turned. A black woman around 50, wearing a cream blazer, stood from the back of first class. She's right. She repeated, her voice calm but carrying weight. I've been sitting here from the start. She showed her ticket, answered every question. She's done nothing wrong. The ones causing trouble are you. The air cracked like glass under pressure. Gregory let out a mocking laugh. Of course you'd defend her. The woman lifted an eyebrow. And what exactly do you mean by that? Gregory stayed silent. No, go on, she said. Say what you were going to say. The silence turned razor sharp. The woman reached into her wallet, pulled out a card and held it up. I'm Angela Price, attorney at law. And let me make this clear, if you try to remove her, Atlas Air will face a discrimination lawsuit, and I'll be the one leading it. Avery blinked. Paul Ramirez and Jenna Collins exchanged glances, their faces pale. The entire cabin suddenly felt fragile, on the verge of breaking. The door opened. 2 security officers stepped in, their voices cutting through the tense quiet. We received a report of a disruptive passenger. Avery pointed toward Naomi. That one. That's the passenger. A middle-aged officer approached his badge, reading Martinez. He looked at Naomi, then around the cabin, saw dozens of phones recording, sore eyes filled with fear, anger, and disbelief. Ma'am, he said gently, I need to ask you to come with us. Naomi lifted her chin. The light from the window cast across her face, sharp as steel, still as glass. Before you do that, she said evenly, there's something you should know. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a small white business card, handing it to him. Dr. Naomi Brooks, co-founder and chief executive officer, Atlas Air. Martinez froze. His eyes shifted to Avery, the same man who had just pointed her out. In that instant, every sound on the plane vanished. Only one truth remained, shining bright in the silence they had just tried to remove the very woman who owned the airline. In that moment, time seemed to stop breathing. The business card in Officer Robert Martinez's hand gleamed under the cabin lights, its embossed letters, Undeniable Dr. Naomi Brooks, co-founder and chief executive officer, Atlas Air. A faint murmur rippled through the cabin, then died instantly. The same passengers who had objected to her minutes ago now sat stiffly, shrinking into their seats, as if the small card could burst into flames and burn through their composure. Captain Thomas Avery stood frozen, his lips dry. What did you say?" Naomi turned slightly, her gaze calm and cold, the kind of stillness that made people afraid of their own reflection. I said she enunciated each word, deliberate. I am the founder of this airline, and you just called security to remove me from my own plane. Gregory Whitman let out a forced laugh, offbeat and trembling. You're joking. You can't be serious. Who did you think I was? Gregory Naomi interrupted. Just another passenger who didn't belong here. Her voice dropped lower, smooth but edged with danger. No. I'm the reason you're able to fly today. The air tightened. No one moved. Martinez stammered, his voice dropping to a whisper. Ma'am, hi. I'm so sorry I didn't. Naomi cut him off. You don't need to apologize to me. Call your superior. Now. Martinez nodded quickly, backing away while speaking into his radio, requesting immediate command contact. We have a high-level situation. The mood in the cabin changed. Curiosity gave way to fear. Jenna Collins clenched her hands, her eyes glistening. Paul Ramirez lowered his head, unable to meet Naomi's gaze. Avery tried to salvage the last fragments of his authority. "Dr. Brooks, if you truly are," Naomi's phone rang. She held it up, switching to speaker. A strong, commanding male voice filled the cabin. "Naomi, what the hell is happening on Flight 447? Every passenger recognized it instantly. Daniel Pierce, the current CEO of Atlas Air, the second most powerful person in the company after her." Naomi didn't answer. She looked directly at Avery, then said evenly, "I think Captain Avery can explain." She handed him the phone. Avery hesitated. "I take it." Naomi ordered, her tone sharp as steel. Avery's hand trembled as he lifted the phone. "Mr. Pierce, Only Daniel's voice thundered through the speaker, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "You just tried to remove the co-founder of this airline from her own flight. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Avery's mouth opened, but no words came out. His face turned pale. "You didn't ask questions. You just assumed." Daniel continued his tone, growing heavier with every word. "She's conducting an undercover evaluation, and you and your crew just failed spectacularly." The air was vacuumed from the room. Jenna began to cry, quietly. Paul stood motionless. Gregory, once so sure of his authority, was now just a trembling shadow in his leather seat. Naomi took back the phone. Her voice softened slightly, but her conviction remained unshakable. "Thank you, Daniel. I'll take it from here." She ended the call. No one spoke. No one even dared to breathe loudly. Naomi stood, adjusted her blazer, and swept her gaze across every face, from those looking down to those who had nodded along with Gregory moments before. "You turned a passenger into a defendant," she said. "You turned this first-class cabin into a courtroom where prejudice hides behind the word procedure. But I'm not the only one you've done this to. I'm just the one with the power to make you pay for it." She turned to Gregory. "Mr. Whitman, you are permanently banned from all Atlas Air flights, effective immediately." Gregory shot up enraged. "You can't do that. I'm a shareholder." Naomi silenced him with a single look. "Shareholders don't stand above human decency. And if you think money can buy back dignity, I'll buy your shares right now." Her tone dropped cold as frost. "For exactly what your integrity is worth nothing." Gregory's mouth hung open, but before he could respond, the two security officers stepped forward. "Sir Martinez said you'll need to come with us." Gregory struggled, shouting, "This is discrimination." Naomi replied, her voice soft as air. "No, this is justice." He was escorted out. The cabin door closed with a sharp, metallic thud, the sound of an era ending. Naomi turned back to the crew. "Captain Avery, you and your team are suspended immediately. Atlas Air will assign a new crew so this flight can continue." Her tone was steady, but her eyes burned with fire. She paused by her seat and spoke slowly, her words carrying through every corner of the cabin. "You've forgotten something. The sky doesn't belong to those with privilege. It belongs to those who deserve it. And today you'll remember that." She sat down, silent, composed, as if the storm had passed. But in truth it had only just begun. As the cabin door closed behind Gregory Whitman, the air inside grew heavy thick with the stillness that follows a storm. The murmurs were gone, the rustling seats silent. What remained was a dense, suffocating quiet, the kind made of guilt, shame, and the dawning weight of realization. Dr. Naomi Brooks sat motionless, her hands resting atop her laptop, back straight eyes fixed on the window. Outside, the New York sky burned a blue so sharp it stung. Inside, those who once believed they belonged here stared down at their shoes as if the floor beneath them had turned into a mirror reflecting what they didn't want to see. Captain Thomas Avery stood frozen shoulders, stiff his face, pale as ash. "Dr. Brooks," Naomi looked up. "There's nothing to say," she interrupted softly, her voice, low calm, yet echoing through the cabin. "You had a chance to do what was right, and you chose wrong." Avery lowered his gaze, his response swallowed by the hum of the air vents. Naomi turned to Paul Ramirez and Jenna Collins. She didn't need to raise her voice. One look from her was enough to make them seem small under the sterile white light of first class. "Jenna," she said, "I don't blame you for being afraid. I blame you for letting fear replace justice." Her tone was steady, slow, but every word etched itself into the air. "And you, Paul," she continued, "you called it protocol. But when a protocol forces someone to prove they deserve to exist in this space, it stops being procedure. It becomes programmed prejudice." Paul opened his mouth, but no sound came. His lips trembled. Naomi rose to her feet, her voice still calm, but leaving no room for argument. "This crew is suspended immediately. I'll have a replacement here within 15 minutes. Avery swallowed hard. "You're cancelling the flight?" Naomi looked at him, her gaze weary but unyielding. "No. I'm cancelling the way you've been flying it." A wave of whispers swept through the cabin. The man in row 3, the one who had demanded her removal earlier, leaned toward his seatmate. "She's really the CEO," the woman in pearls beside him whispered back. "She's more than that. She's the founder." Silence lingered. Then she quietly folded her fashion magazine, as if trying to hide the late-arriving shame. Naomi turned to Angela Price, the attorney at the back. "Thank you," she said softly. Angela smiled. "I just spoke the truth. You're the one who made them listen." They exchanged a look, no words needed. It wasn't just empathy, it was recognition, the silent understanding of two women who had both been underestimated and learned how to turn contempt into power. Martinez returned, giving a respectful nod. "Ma'am, the replacement crew is on its way." Naomi nodded once. "Good." "And these 3, she said, glancing at Avery Ramirez, "and Jenna will be escorted off. They are grounded until I decide whether they are still worthy of flying under the Atlas name." Jenna broke down, tears spilling as she spoke through trembling lips. "I'm sorry, Dr. Brooks. I didn't mean to. Naomi stopped her gently. "You don't owe me an apology. Save it for the passengers you've made feel small." Jenna lowered her head, tears dripping onto the reflective floor. Avery took a step forward. "I've served for 30 years. I've never been humiliated like this." Naomi met his eyes. "Not humiliation, Captain. Consequence." A pause, sharp and deliberate. Then she spoke slowly, each word, crisp as glass. "You believed you held control over this cabin. But real power isn't in the cockpit, it's in how you use it. And today you used it to demean someone. I will not allow that to exist at Atlas Air," Martinez signaled to his team. The 3, Avery, Ramirez, and Jenna, walked out, one by one, none daring to look back. The door shut behind them with a firm click. The air felt cleaner. A faint breeze from the air system swept through, carrying away the weight of accusation, arrogance, and misplaced authority. Naomi turned back to the passengers, her tone low and warm, the voice of someone who had endured enough and stood not just for herself, but for everyone. "This isn't revenge," she said. "This is responsibility. For those who never got the chance to sit in seat 2A, who had no camera to record, no voice to be heard." A few passengers nodded. One man whispered, "Thank you." Naomi answered softly, "Don't thank me. change the way you see people. Outside, the sunset cast golden light through the cabin windows, painting her face in amber hues. Naomi closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. In that silence, she didn't feel victory. She felt something deeper, something solemn, beautiful, and necessary. Because she knew this moment wasn't just about exposing prejudice. It was about rewriting how an entire system valued humanity. 20 minutes later, when the new flight crew entered the atmosphere, in the cabin was completely transformed. The tension was gone, the suspicion erased. What remained was a solemn silence, the kind reserved for those who had just made an entire system bow its head. The new captain, Karen Holt, about 45 years old, tall with steady eyes and quiet authority, walked straight to seat 2A, Dr. Brooks. She said, her voice low but firm. "I'm Holt. I'll be flying you to Charlotte today." Naomi looked up, offering a small, composed smile. "Thank you, Captain. All I need is a safe flight." "You'll have that," Holt replied. Short, precise, and absolute. The new crew worked with calm precision. Every move was efficient, quiet, deliberate. No wasted gestures, no hesitation. And then, like a wound freshly stitched, the plane began to taxi. Naomi gazed out the window. The runway lights flowed past like streams of memory. She remembered every stare, every question, every moment she'd had to prove she belonged in a place she had built. As the plane lifted off the ground, Naomi closed her eyes. She was finally flying, not as a passenger, but as a woman, carrying an entire system that needed to change. She opened her laptop and began to type. Her report was not a statement. It was an indictment. From Dr. Naomi Brooks to Daniel Pierce, Chief Executive Officer of Atlas Air, the Board of Directors, and the Head of Human Resources. Subject immediate action. Required Flight 447 incident report. Naomi typed with steady fingers. Each word was a clean incision against white space. Passenger names, specific actions, exact times, words spoken, reactions, who stayed silent, who enabled it. She documented everything. No emotion, no judgment. Just truth. But truth, she knew, could be the most devastating weapon. When she pressed send, the screen glowed, reflecting her face, no longer angry, only resolute. She had just triggered an earthquake. 3 hours later, as the aircraft touched down in Charlotte, her phone began to vibrate non-stop. One notification after another appeared on the screen. Subject immediate dismissal, Captain Thomas Avery. Subject temporary reassignment, Paul Ramirez and Jenna Collins. Subject permanent ban passenger, Gregory Whitman. Atlas Air moved faster than any airline had ever done in its history. Within 2 hours, Daniel Pierce had convened an emergency meeting with the board and signed disciplinary orders on the spot. Avery was terminated for gross violation of anti-discrimination policy and failure to manage an in-flight incident. Ramirez and Collins were reassigned to internal administrative roles and mandated to complete 6 months of bias retraining. Gregory Whitman received a lifetime flight ban, along with a legal notice. Direct, final. No room for appeal. But Naomi didn't stop there. She ordered a full-scale audit of the entire system, covering the past 2 years, investigating every complaint involving passengers of color, passengers with disabilities, or those flagged for unspecified concerns. No one would escape scrutiny. She knew what happened today was only the visible tip of the iceberg, and Atlas Air, the company she had built from the ground up, had allowed that ice to thicken in silence. She would shatter it piece by piece. News erupted across the internet within hours. A passenger from the flight had recorded the entire scene, Naomi being questioned, threatened with removal, and finally revealing who she was, The 3-minute video spread like wildfire. Headlines flooded every platform. Black woman CEO humiliated on her own airline, then turns the tables. The hashtag Dignity in Flight became a nationwide movement overnight. Major outlets called. Talk shows wanted interviews. Magazines requested features. Naomi responded to none. She simply told her assistant, "Decline everything. This isn't my story. It's the system's story." A week later, Atlas Air released an official statement signed by Daniel Pierce and broadcast nationwide. Atlas Air failed to uphold the dignity of all passengers. We accept full responsibility and commit to immediate reform. Comprehensive retraining for all frontline employees on unconscious bias awareness. The establishment of an independent passenger oversight committee and quarterly public transparency reports on complaint resolutions. Dignity is not a privilege. It is a human right. Atlas Air apologizes and will do better. Naomi read the statement from her private office. She didn't smile. She didn't feel satisfaction. She simply nodded the way one does after cleaning a deep wound. The window before her opened to a vast blue sky. An Atlas Air jet passed across it, its body bearing the logo she had designed in the company's first year. She watched it, her eyes distant, yet clear. She knew that justice today was not the end. It was the beginning of a new era, one where respect would no longer be a slogan, but the very foundation upon which the sky itself was built. 2 weeks after the incident, on Flight 447, the top floor of Atlas Air's headquarters in Charlotte glowed under bright evening lights. The main conference room where billion-dollar contracts had once been signed was now filled to capacity. There was no champagne, no glamorous presentation, only tense faces, cautious eyes, and the wooden podium at the center where Dr. Naomi Brooks was about to say what everyone feared to hear. Naomi carried no notes. She didn't need them. Daniel Pierce, the co-founding CEO, sat at the head of the table, his expression grave. On either side were the directors of flight operations, customer service training, and human resources executives who once took pride in calling Atlas Air the airline of compassion. Today they all knew that slogan had just been stripped bare by the woman who created it. Naomi stepped up to the podium. The room seemed to lower its own heartbeat, as if the entire building was holding its breath. She paused for a moment, scanning the faces before her, then began to speak, her voice low, steady, yet so clear that no one dared look away. What happened on Flight 447? She began was not an incident. Her tone wasn't loud, but each word struck like a hammer. It was a symptom. She let the silence do the rest. A symptom of bias, of the habit of judging people by appearances, of a system that we ourselves built and then allowed to twist on its own. Naomi looked straight at Daniel, then swept her gaze across the room. I've been asked many times why I didn't get angry, why I didn't react when I was humiliated. The answer is simple, because I wanted the system to expose its own truth. The light from above cast a split shadow across her face, half bright, half dim, a perfect mirror of what she was about to say next. On that flight, I wasn't just doubted. I was tested to prove that I deserved to exist in the space I created. Her voice caught for a breath, then steadied again. And I realized millions of people live with that feeling every single day. She stepped closer to the edge of the podium, her eyes piercing through every row. They are the passengers asked to verify their tickets because they don't look like everyone else. The employees underestimated because of their names, their skin color, their gender, or simply because they don't fit the mold. And when that happens, We, the ones in power, call it standard procedure. A wave of silence swept the room. No one moved. But the truth is, Naomi continued. Every institutionalized bias wears our faces. Not the face of one bad actor, but of those who see it happen and choose silence. Daniel drew a slow breath, his gaze shifting uneasily. Naomi turned toward the large screen behind her, where footage from Flight 447 played the video captured by a passenger showing her being questioned. Gregory's smirk, the crew's hesitation, and the moment she raised her business card. The sound was off. Only the moving images remained like a mirror. This was the real test, she said, quietly. Not for me, but for all of us. She turned back her voice, low but sharp. And we failed. One of the regional directors lowered his head, fists clenched. Naomi inhaled deeply, then continued. I don't want apologies. I want action. I want every policy, every protocol, every training session rewritten, so no one ever has to prove they are worthy of respect. Her voice began to rise, not angry, but powerful. We will retrain our entire workforce, not just in skills, but in humanity. We will establish an independent oversight committee where anyone can report mistreatment without fear. And we will make every outcome public, because transparency is the only path to trust. She paused, then spoke softly, as if to every soul in the room. We forgot that the sky doesn't belong to the wealthy. It belongs to those who show respect. I didn't build Atlas Air to fly higher than others. I built it so everyone could fly together. A single pair of hands began clapping at the back of the room. Then another. Then the entire room stood. It wasn't polite applause. It was the sound of people shaken to their core. Daniel stepped forward, his voice catching. Naomi, you reminded us why this company exists. I promise we will turn your words into action. Not for the media, but for our conscience. Naomi smiled faintly. Don't promise me, Daniel. Promise the people who will board our planes tomorrow. The room fell silent again. That sentence wasn't just the end of a speech. It was a vow. As Naomi stepped out of the room, the last light of day poured through the glass hallway, wrapping her shoulders in gold. In the distance, an Atlas airplane rose into the blazing sky, its silver body catching fire in the sunset. Naomi stopped and watched it climb. In that moment, she knew everything was beginning again. Not through power, but through dignity. The next morning, the city of Charlotte woke under a thin veil of fog. The Atlas Air headquarters tower glowed like a lamp in the middle of downtown, catching the first light of a new day. A day when every employee knew the company's history had turned. In the corner office on the 47th floor, Dr. Naomi Brooks stood at the glass coffee cup in hand eyes, following an Atlas Air jet as it lifted off the runway. The silver fuselage cut across the sky, leaving a slender white trail like a vein on the palm of fate. Every time she watched that scene, Naomi remembered Flight 447, the moment when, even with the title of Chief Executive Officer, she was forced to prove she had the right to exist. Now that moment had become a turning point that pushed the aviation world to face the truth it had avoided. Outside her office, reporters still kept watch. The story of a black chief executive officer humiliated on her own airline, and then forcing the entire system to change, had flooded television, newspapers, and social media. The hashtag Dignity in Flight had held the top spot for 8 straight days. But Naomi stayed away from the cameras. She did not go on television, did not post, did not grant interviews. To her, real justice didn't need a lens, it needed action. Her phone buzzed. It was Angela Price, the attorney from the flight. Naomi Angela's voice was deep and warm. You have a nation looking at you as a symbol. But what they admire most is not that you have power. It is how you choose to use it. Naomi smiled. I do not want to be a symbol. I only want no one to endure what I endured, even in a space they built themselves. And you did that. Angela paused. You made people believe that dignity is not a privilege. Naomi answered softly. Dignity was never a privilege. People just forgot. 3 days later, Naomi walked into the main hall at the Atlas International Crew Training Center, where hundreds of employees from across the United States had gathered. Captains, flight attendants, ground staff technicians, honored passengers, all were there for the launch of the new program Naomi had initiated. Walk a mile, the journey of taking 1 mile in someone else's shoes. She stepped onto the stage light, washing over a calm face. No music bed. No empty slogans. Only a true voice, low, deep, and commanding. When I sat in seat 2A, they did not see a founder. They saw a black woman, an unfamiliar passenger, a mistake to be corrected. That taught me this sometimes, to change the system. You must step down from the seat of power and sit where people are told they are wrong. Naomi paused. The hall was utterly silent. From today, each quarter, Atlas Air's senior leaders, including me, will fly anonymously like regular passengers. We will experience the service ourselves, document everything, and be judged like anyone else. Because if leadership does not know what it feels like to be doubted, to be judged, to be diminished, it can never build a fair environment. Applause thundered. A few people wiped away tears. A young flight attendant near the front whispered, "This is why I chose Atlas." Naomi smiled. She did not promise perfection, only that they would begin again the right way. That afternoon, she attended a special meeting with the new Independent Oversight Council, formed under the reforms. The council included former passengers who had lodged complaints, civil rights advocates, and experts in training for unconscious bias. The chair asked Dr. Brooks, "Do you think what happened to you is the worst thing that ever happened at Atlas?" Naomi shook her head. "No. The worst is what no one ever sees." Another member, someone once asked to leave a flight last year for supposedly being dressed inappropriately, asked, "Do you believe people can change?" Naomi said, "I do, but only when they are willing to look directly at where they once were wrong." The room settled into silence, then a soft murmur of assent. Everyone understood. This was not a meeting. It was a wake-up call. That night, Naomi returned to her office. City lights still burned, but her heart was calmer than ever. She reopened the passenger's video from that day. The moment she raised her business card, the entire cabin held its breath. In that moment, power shifted, not because of a title, but because of truth. She scrubbed slowly through the footage, Gregory's eyes stalling the captain's face, draining the cabin's breathing like a chorus of shame. Naomi shut the screen and murmured to herself, "Power can make people afraid, but only dignity makes them change." She opened her leather notebook and wrote a single line. "Power is not what you hold. It is what you pass on." Months went by. Her reforms spread across the airline industry. Other carriers began adopting similar programs, calling them perspective flights, allowing service employees to role-play as passengers to feel what others feel. The media called it the Brooks effect, but Naomi refused the spotlight. She spent time at small airports, talking with ticket agents, technicians, and cabin cleaners. To everyone, she asked the same question. Today, did anyone make you feel you were not respected? A simple question, but to Naomi it was the barometer of culture. One day in March, Naomi received a handwritten letter from a new flight attendant named Lila Green. "Dr. Brooks, I have never met you, but today, when a passenger yelled and called me names, I remembered your story." I did not get angry. I looked him in the eye and said, "Sir, you are speaking to a person, not a class of service." He went quiet. "Thank you for teaching me to stand on my own dignity." Naomi finished reading and sat quietly for a long time. Her eyes glistened, filled with a deep pride, not because she was praised, but because the message had moved beyond her to people who had never met her. 6 months later, at an international conference on ethics in service industries, Naomi was invited to speak. More than 20 countries, thousands of delegates, hundreds of airlines, and millions watching live. She brought no slides and no deck, only a story. One day she began, I was asked by staff at my own airline to leave a flight. They said it was because of procedure. In truth, it was because of bias. She told everything without embellishment and without accusation. She spoke with the calm of someone who had been humiliated, had been silent, and had stood up. "I did not seek revenge," she said. "I rebuilt. If I had only taken revenge, the story would have ended with me." By rebuilding, the story continues in others. The hall rose to its feet. In that applause, Naomi felt something clearly. She was no longer the center of a tragedy, but a guiding light for change. Returning to the office that evening, she found Daniel Pierce waiting at the door with a card. From the board, he said, "They want to name the new training program after you, the Brooks Initiative." Naomi smiled gently. "Daniel, if they truly learn anything from me, they will not need my name to remember." Daniel regarded her with a smile. "You never wanted to be honored, did you?" She replied, "I only want to be replaced by better actions." Over the weekend, Naomi left the city and visited her mother's home in the North Carolina suburbs. Her mother in her 70s, hair snow-white hands, trembling as she poured tea, chuckled back on television again. Naomi shook her head and sat. "No, Mom." This time it was a conference speech. Her mother nodded. "Your father would be proud." Naomi was quiet. Her father once denied a pilot's job because of his skin color had dyed when she was in college. "The day you were born," her mother said, "he said if you ever got to fly, he wanted you not only to fly the plane, but to steer how the world looks at black people." Naomi looked out at the yard, sunlight on the wooden porch, the scent of tea drifting. "I think," she said softly, "he just saw that." 1 year later, Atlas Air became the first airline in the world to receive the Global Equality Standard, an international benchmark for fairness and respect in air service. Magazines hailed Naomi as the woman who redefined the sky. When asked how she felt, she answered, "I didn't define the sky. I reminded people that everyone has the right to see it." She still sat in seat 2A whenever she flew, not to relive a memory, but to make sure that memory never returned. One late night on a company flight from Dallas back to Charlotte, passengers slept beneath warm amber lights. Naomi closed her laptop and looked out the window. Above, a black sky sparkled with stars reflected faintly on her face. A young flight attendant stepped close and whispered, "Mom, I do not know if I should say this, but thank you. Without you, I would have quit." Naomi smiled, light as air. "You do not need to thank me. Just remember, whenever someone makes you doubt your worth, remember that you are the one who makes them look again." She turned back to the window, watching the wing catch the moonlight. Everything was quiet. Only the steady engine sound, like the heartbeat of a changing world. The next morning, after landing, Naomi lingered a moment. She took out her phone and opened the old note, the single line she had written that night. "Power is not what you hold, it is what you pass on." She added a new line, "And dignity is not earned, it is remembered." Naomi saved it, closed the device, and stood. Dawn spilled through the cabin, falling across her face, tired but at peace. She stepped off the aircraft, leaving behind Seat 2, now a symbol of awakening. On the fuselage of an Atlas air jet, a new line had been painted beneath the wing dignity in every flight. Naomi stopped, looked up, and allowed herself the faintest smile. The sky above had not changed. The people beneath it had. From the perspective of an expert in leadership culture and professional ethics, the story of Dr. Naomi Brooks is not merely the journey of a woman who dared to confront prejudice, but a mirror reflecting how power can be used to heal rather than to punish. When the world watched her rise from humiliation, they did not just see a chief executive officer. They saw a symbol of a new era, one where dignity was no longer a slogan, but the very foundation upon which an entire system operated. Naomi did not retaliate. She rebuilt. She did not condemn. She educated. And it was that calm composure, not anger, that shook an entire industry. In today's society, where bias still hides beneath the surface of procedure, the real question is not who holds the power, but who has the courage to use it the right way. If you believe the world needs more people like Naomi Brooks, people who choose fairness over reaction, action over words, and human dignity over prejudice, then like this video to help spread that message. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories where compassion becomes the true force that changes the world. And before you go, leave a comment with a short phrase that shows your belief in what is right. Keep your dignity.